Hi, this is Karen O'Brien, and I'm going to do a series of videos that are going to help you understand whether or not your model is running okay. So let's call this a review series. Let's take our self-help kit and we export and run that, and then let's take a look at what we have created and whether or not it's valid. So now we're going to start with what have we created. Now, if you look at your export folder, you'll see something like several different kinds of files. And I typically always sort these by type, but you might like to sort these by alphabetical name so that you can quickly find things. I've always sorted them by type, and I've always made it to where the .dat files have a slightly different opener than the .out files so that I can easily and quickly visually see what I'm looking at. So we have maybe 4 or 5 different types of files in FLO-2D, and I'll start from the top of the list and work my way down. These .check files are ASCII files that report the output and things that you might want to look into or check after your model run is complete. Now I'm not going to open any of these files at this point. We'll get to that when we start looking at more review-oriented videos and ideas, okay? These .dat files, that is what you just built with QGIS. So QGIS built this, but as soon as you exported these files to this .dat system, you have basically decoupled it from QGIS. And when you run the model, when you run the FLO-2D engine, it's not going to be looking at QGIS or interfacing with QGIS to do the simulation. It's going to come and find these data files to run the simulation. You'll start to see more and more HDF5 as time goes on because HDF5 is a much more efficient way to store data. So we're going to take a look at these later on in another video, but right now most of the data that you see in HDF5 is just time-dependent output data because it gets really big, and this is a great way to kind of shrink it down into a manageable data set. And of course, then you have your .out files. Now, your .out files are typically speaking, the .out files are just output data from the FlowPro engine. So you might get some data from the FlowPro engine, and you might get some data from the storm drain engine. So you can see here there's different kinds of data. And these data files are all mapped to the data input manual. We'll show that next. And then we have these guys down here. These are the RGH files, and basically what these files do is they reflect changes that the engine has made to your data to, 1, keep it stable, 2, keep it within the limits or the tolerance of your limiting fruit, and 3, make adjustments to elevations so that your grid elevation matches your channels and storm drain elevations. And I guess that's kind of what they do. Those 3 things right there, those 3 or 4 things, whatever I had there. And then of course there are a few files that you're going to see that will be more related to your storm drain output. Something specific to your storm drain output. So that will be the swim.rpt, and the swim.rain is something we write, but only because it's needed for the swim GUI, because obviously the rain in our case is coming from FLO-2D. So we have every one of these files, for the most part, is ASCII data. The swim files are ASCII, the FLO-2D files are ASCII. The only thing that's not ASCII are a handful of data sets, and that is neighbors.dat and these 2 HDF5s. And of course, if you have any kind of like levee breach or anything like that, you'll also get some HDF5 data from that system. All your output data is ASCII. All FLO-2D data is space delimited. So if you open up a data file, you're going to see that all these delimiters are spaces. See, here's a data file and here's an output file example, and these are all spaces, as you can see. Now, if you want to map any of these data files, it's very easy. You just use the data input manual. And in the data input manual, let's pop the data input manual over here, and let's pop this guy over here. And what we see is, let's grab the cont.dat file from the data input manual. And we'll just center this on this page. Okay, what you see here is a line of variables. This would be just example data. And then this is the data that goes along with your self-help run. So as you can see, simulation time, T out, LG plot, metric, I backup. So those are kind of like, this is how long you want your simulation to run. In our case, it's 10 hours. This is your output interval. In our case, it's 0.1 hours. This is your whether or not you want to plot this in display mode, graphics mode, or text mode, or batch mode. And ours is doing it, of course, in text mode because it's faster. This is your metric versus English switch, and this is a backup switch. Okay. I'm not going to cover any of this data because if you want to cover this data, what you do is you take this variable name and you come down here to the file descriptions and you find it in this alphabetical list, in this alphabetical table. So if I'm looking for SUMIL, or what we call simul, you can see that that is the simulation time in hours, and this is the range of values. So there's really no range other than it has to be positive. There's no limit to the simulation time, but just so you know, the longer you make your simulation time, the longer it's going to take your model to run. Just be aware. That's why we do like around, in this case, 10 hours, 36 hours, something like that. We kind of try to limit that to the bare minimum amount of time we need to get the information we want out of our simulation. Okay, now output data is also in the data input manual, but it's in chapter 5. So if you come down here to chapter 5, your output files will be listed alphabetically, starting with the base.out. Actually, it might be starting with some other ones, but base.out is the one we can see the best. So yeah, we got some base.out, a couple of other batch files, different kinds of output files that you might see. Some of these might be binary, some of them might be, most of them are ASCII text files. And then if you wanted to see a specific file and what it was in it, that would give you this information right here, like chanmax.out, chanbankl.check. Check files are in here, output files are in here. All right, that is basically it for an overview of the FLO-2D model and what it is exactly that you export and what it is that the FlowPro engine creates for you when you run a model. I will say one thing I did want to just point out, that these 3 data files right here are created by the FlowPro engine. So if you export a project and you're always exporting into the same folder and running from the same folder because that's just the way you roll, there's nothing wrong with that. Just know that if you make a modification to your grid element elevation, Manning's n value, or shape and size of your grid system, you need to delete these 3 files before your next run, or just export it into a new folder, because these 3 files they take precedence over mannings.n.dat and topo.dat, which are that's the grid that QGIS creates. So just be aware of that. Okay, the next thing that we will do is look at the debug system. So I'm going to stop this video here.